Hello, how are you, Olena?
Very good. Thank you for
Good.
asking. And did we start recording?
We have started recording.
Oh, that's amazing. Um, remember we sometimes ago, like maybe a month ago, we did this amazing presentation for Pro Law No Code meetup, and we unfortunately didn't record it. So
Yes.
now we've got an opportunity to actually revisit this presentation and record it this time so we can share with people in our YouTube channel. Do you think it's a good idea?
I think it's an excellent idea. I think we should do it. I'm excited.
Okay, let's try then.
Okay.
Uh,
I guess I'll introduce. Welcome YouTubers. Today we're going to talk about to code or not to code, and we're going to look at specifically the Power Platform and the Dynamics 365 business applications ecosystem. And when sometimes situations arise where you might be a non-coder like me and you see the benefit of code, or vice versa. You might be a coder and there may be benefit to no code, which may surprise some people. So for those that don't know who we are, if we go to the next slide.
this technical difficulties.
There we go.
Let's me.
This is Olena.
Should I talk about myself or
Absolutely.
no? So my name is Olena, and BizApps MVP, and I'm a coder, and been working with Dynamics 365 for many years. And now I'm a Power Platform enthusiast and advocate, and I'm all the Power Platform excited person, promoting Power Platform everywhere, including YouTube channel.
And that's me. Hi, my name's Leon Tribe. I'm also a business applications MVP. Unlike Elena, I'm not a coder. I can do some configuration. I used to code a long time ago, back when it was called C, not C++ or C Sharp. So that was a long time ago. Been working with what is now business applications, the CRM side, for 15 or so years. And we're in some ways, myself and Elena are two ends of the business application spectrum.
Like yin and yang.
Yin
In
and
a
yang.
way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, no, that's fine. So back, it used to be, is it one or the other, right? So there used to be a mindset that you had to go either all configuration or all code. And of course, things are changing now. That it's not a either or. And if we go to the next slide, if we look at the old way of doing things, then it used to be, okay, well, do we configure? And if we don't configure, do we script? And if we don't script, do we write a plugin or call out, for those that remember the old days of version 3? And there wasn't much way to move between them, right? So probably there was a tendency, certainly on the developer side of things, I'm guessing, to err towards the side of code because it's the most flexible, obviously. But things are changing, thankfully. So if we go one more. And so now it's turning more into a spectrum. So although we can start off with the Power Automate flows, which are largely no code or maybe a little bit of code, it's more scripting. If you can write an Excel formula, then you can script a Power Automate flow without too much difficulty. But even if you start there, if you even start with a flow, if you need to make it more powerful, then you can get behind the scenes. You can start scripting it. If you want to run it on your own resources, if you want to create custom connectors, you can, or you can devolve it completely to Azure Logic Apps and run it as pure code and run a whole run it as part of a DevOps environment. So we've got it's more of a spectrum these days than this sort of on or off that it used to be. And Microsoft characterizes as no cliffs. They don't want people to sort of hit roadblocks and then have to sort of start again. So if you hear the term no cliffs, this is this idea that's running, that it's referring to, this idea of that you can gradually move across from least complex to most complex without any issues. Next slide. So what's some examples where we might have made this transition? So a lot of these examples are in the pre-Power Automate world, because they were just examples that came to my mind. And one of them, in this case, is modifying a form for a record type. So this is something that my Salesforce does really well, and arguably Dynamics 365 is still catching up, or Dataflex Pro is still catching up with. And it's this idea that if you've got a different kind of contact or a different kind of account, you want to display different kinds of information. So if it's an account and it's a supplier, then you'll want different information to if it's a customer and things like this. And so you want the form to dynamically change. And that can be difficult. So if you're doing it with no code, then you probably would use something like business rules. In that you can make fields appear and disappear, you can make them compulsory, things like this. But if there's a lot of fields, then it becomes tricky because you can't dynamically shift forms. Although we can create multiple forms for a record, we can't dynamically shift between them, and then we can't hide tabs. So while if we were being belligerent, we could probably make it happen with business rules. It's not elegant, and it's not going to be easy to maintain. It's going to be a little bit awkward. In this case, a good example, if we go one more.
Yeah, I just, if you don't mind, I just
No,
want
okay,
to
jump in.
just the jumping is in my current project. We actually we use account for the client and property, and we have some other types of account, and we definitely use the JavaScript in all those hiding, showing magic, and from the user perspective, it looks like completely different. It looks different, and those forms look completely different, and you cannot say it's one. And yeah, it's a scripting in our case because of the massive amount of fields, especially for the entity like account.
Yeah, and if we go, and that's exactly right. So an excellent solution is exactly what you're describing, Olena, which is to use a bit of form script. It's you get finer control in terms of triggers and what can be done. Generally, it'll give you a better user experience because you have control of the trigger. You have much better control of what you can do with the form, and arguably it's a bit more maintainable as well. It's easier to do it. And things like tabs, you can with the code you get access to being able to control the tabs of the form, whereas you don't get that with the business rules. Unfortunately, they haven't exposed that to the configuration layer. So you get a lot more control with form script. You get a better user experience, and yeah, in the old days, there used to be this mentality that if you had to resort to code, then in some way it was a failing. Not at all. They're tools. They're completely valid tools, and it's about using the right tool for the right job. So if we go to the next example, then this was one where we were. And both Olena and I worked on this. This is for University of New South Wales, and this is an online form. So for those that are familiar with the portals, it's a Power. I should get the name right. Power
Apps portals.
Power Apps platform. I always think it should be Power Platform. It's Power Apps.
They're Power Apps portals now.
Yeah, not ADX Studio anymore, unfortunately.
We also got much power over everything now with Microsoft introducing Web API, which we all are very excited that now you could actually perform operations like the crowd operations. We can create, update, and not just query entities from the portal, which is yay.
Yes, we can do proper crowd operations.
Yep.
But in this case, we were taking a form. So this is a submission form for students wanting extra time on their course or special consideration, things like this. And there's some black magic at the moment, right? So there's some black magic that brings that automatically into Dynamics. So if you haven't seen the Power Apps portal, it's basically you configure the forms within Dataflex Pro, what used to be called CDS. And then they expose themselves, so to speak, on the portal, and they use so the web forms are forms configured inside Dynamics. So that's configured a form for Dynamics 365 for sales, or for for a model-driven app, then this would be a very, very familiar experience. But once you fill in that data, it magically comes across into CDS, into Dataflex Pro. And then the traditional pattern, I guess, would be you'd use a workflow to convert that custom entity that you'd be using for the forms, because you don't want to necessarily overload your case with different form fields, etc. That would automatically convert it to a case, and then you'd use another workflow to route the case. And that seems well and good on paper. But what we found with University of New South Wales is there was a couple of snags with that approach. If we go next slide, the first one is attachments. So often when people were, giving, say, special consideration, they're attaching medical records, or if it was something to do with them as a student, they needed to identify themselves, they'd attach some kind of identification record. But the problem is workflows can't handle attachments. They can't do it. They can create a new record. We can copy values across from a record, but attachments fail. And another problem we have. If we go to the next slide.
Sure. Sorry.
Here it is. It's not scalable. So what we found was we'd have a workflow for each kind of form. So each cluster of forms would be for a different department. Each department would get an entity, and so that would sort of contain the fields specific to that department to one entity, and that's fine. So you'd have one workflow per entity, and that's not a big deal. But the workflow routing evolved into this one big workflow, this massive, unmaintainable, not scalable workflow. It was so messy that in the end you didn't really go through and make sure your new addition to the workflow was consistent with the rest. You just sort of added it, see if it worked, made sure if other stuff didn't break, and it just got messy. It was a lot of tech debt. And but this was the way it kind of had to be with configuration, and obviously it wasn't scalable. And so we had to come up with a different approach. And so the solution was custom workflow activity. So by putting in a couple of simple custom workflow activities, and as part of our form configuration, having value sets such as what queue to route the form to, it was possible to pass those values through the workflows and make it much more maintainable, a lot more scalable, and overall a better user and a better administrator experience. So yeah, and there it is. So so one of the things, this is Olena's rule, right? So Olena's rule for the workflow was we can't have if statements. With the routing, it was a wall of ifs. So if the form has this kind of property, then put it over here. Else, if it's this, then do this, and if it's this, and this, then do this. And it was a horrible mess. So we got rid of all these ifs. We just passed through variables. So
I just found that people, instead of reading through all the existing logic, were just adding at the end their own logic because they were too scared to touch anything or change anything and break stuff. And the massive workflow was a bottleneck, and they had a couple of references to different queues, so which were breaking from environment to environment, which was another headache.
Yeah, this completely simplified things. We could pass the attachments through seamlessly. We could, because as I say, we had parameters on the form configuration to allow us to know what case to route it to, rather than embedding that within the workflow.
Yeah.
Then we could, it separated the workflow, the business rules, if you like, from the configuration. So it was a much smarter approach. And it worked really well. So again, just a smattering of code. No, it's all good. Just a smattering of code, and it made things better. The third example is where things get a bit more practical, right? So we've described some examples and some theory that sometimes things lend themselves better to one way or the other, but then the world gets in the way. Then complications happen. And I've got little grommet here. Is it correct? Yeah, Wallace is the man, isn't it? And the grommet's the dog. Because sometimes it feels like this. I think when you're building in Dynamics, in business applications, you can feel like you're just sort of putting track down as you go. Especially if you're running an agile project and you get all this tech debt, and it's always good to keep a mindset of maintainability and while you're extending, right? So while you're extending, right? Okay, am I building this so that the next person that comes along can keep this going, or they're going to be very confused and that kind of thing. And so if we go to the next slide, the third example for me,
I'm just magic dog.
is the good news with business applications is there's always at least two ways to do things. There's the deprecated way and there's the release candidate way. It's a bit of an in-joke for those of us that play with business applications. If we look at, say, dialogues, which are now almost completely deprecated, but there's not, in that case, there's not much of a release candidate really. Workflows is probably a better example, right? The workflows are semi-deprecated, and we've got Power Automate flows, which can do a lot of the things that workflows can do.
Yeah, but they're about that. Not still everything, right? So
not quite everything. We can't do synchronous workflows in Power Automate yet. But the good news is there's always at least two ways to do things. So we have an option. Often when we're architecting solutions, we have an option of which way to go. We don't have to. We're not pigeonholed to go down one path. So we can use configuration, or we can use some JavaScript, or we could use workflow, custom activities, that kind of thing. And so this is where the third example is going to. If we go to the next slide, let's say we set up some strict rules, and we say in these specific circumstances we'll always use a workflow. In these specific circumstances we'll always use configuration, and so on and so forth. Then what we can risk happening is we'll get sort of these little pockets of JavaScript which do one thing over here, and then we have some configuration, does some stuff over here, and it's not necessarily maintainable. You don't know if a business rule is doing something, or whether it's a JavaScript, or what's causing the behaviors in the application.
Yeah.
And so if you've got sort of like edge examples where, in principle script might be better, but look, everything else has been configured, so let's just do it as configuration and we'll live with it. But that may be a better way to go.
We still, I think there's these days, I think we're all in kind of mess with this, and we all mix and flows, workflows, and JavaScript's business rules, and especially the flows and workflows, because we try to build the new stuff in a new way, but we still have workflows which are hanging there waiting till it's fully deprecated, and we're forced to just replace them. And it's
workflows are very seductive, right? Because they're very easy. From a licensing perspective, they're cheap, right? Because there's no license implications, so they're easy. You don't have to think about too hard about the licensing. So they're quite seductive, but they're not necessarily the way to go. And if you're building other flows and it's an edge example, then maybe just bite the bullet and build the flow.
I already mentioned all the things.
So, what happens if we stick to the rules? If we stick to the best technology, you might end up with a mess, right? We've got all these things that we can use, all these things available to us. And as I mentioned, licensing can come into play. Whether use one technology or another may have a licensing implication these days, especially with the Power Automate flows. There's certainly, there can be license implications there, depending on what they're doing, what they're talking to, how they're talking to, etc. So I guess the conclusion from my half of the going from no code to code is focus on what you're trying to achieve rather than trying to play a game of can we do this without code. It's very seductive to think everything's a nail when you've got a hammer, but really there's no reason to fear code if it's being used for the right reasons. And another thing that we did on the University of New South Wales project was we had core values. We had values that we were these are the principles with which we designed the solution with. We architected to values rather than architecting to strict rules about whether you use code or not code. This was more the focus. There was a no code first policy, but if there was a good reason to go to code, then based on these values, then we put the case up. So things to think about would be: are we building the solution for the user's experience? Is it for the customer experience? Because it can be different, right? So a system might be might provide a good customer experience, but for the person using it, might have to do a few extra clicks to provide the customer what they need. It could even be, in some cases, the customer's customer experience. So it could be that the user is enabling the customer to do their job better. And so we could be designing a system for that purpose. Might be we're integrating through to their own backend systems or something. And as we've talked about in some of these examples, you want to make it maintainable, scalable, and extendable. And so so think about some of the things we talked about in the examples. And ultimately, we want to keep it practical, right? We want to be able to create a system that's more of a legacy than a stopgap fix. We want something that we can hand over to someone else, whether it be the customer, whether it be another consultant, and so that they can keep it going, so they can provide value to the client and keep them doing a great job. Thank you very much, Olena.
Thank you, Leon.
Now from the other side, from coding to no code.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting to actually listen to this bit again, and then I was less distracted by people on the call and by my own thoughts mentally preparing me to my next bit. I was listening to I was just like interesting moment, and we've been together on this project you mentioned, and I was just reflecting. I was thinking through this latest technology changes and how quickly everything changes these days. And I was thinking, even is it still a thing like scalability, extendability? We sometimes extendability these days is something like, oh, tomorrow probably our system will not exist anymore because the technologies have changed in a way that it's easier to create a new system than rebuild or extend the old one. But I think the maintainability is still a key thing, and I also and a user experience, and as you said, I'm interested in your concept and separating the user experience and the customer experience, which I can actually apply to my current project, which in my customer maintains their own customers, which are big organizations, agencies, and they've got their own customers. So we have to think about all those people and organizations all together, and it's all happening in Dynamics. It's all happening via portals, and it's pretty crazy, like scalable and in a way enterprisey, and it's interesting, and how it's all actually cool. That's all we're building these days. It's really impressive. I was reviewing my slides. I was unimpressed that I'm telling only one story to you, but at that time it was very important to me. I was actually very pleased with the way we approached it's what I'm gonna tell you is a story. Is basically a problem which we solved with Nocode. And as I mentioned before, I'm a coder and I've done lots of coding in my life. And I used to be like very pro code, and gradually, as Leon mentioned, it used to be code and no code. And these days, and it just happened. It happened through the time. We had the custom workflow activities as a part of no code, and now we do less and less code. And I do myself lots of no code these days. And here I'm pretending and playing. I wear my dev hat, but I'm gonna be presenting the no code story. And this is a story for my current customer, and this is a field service unicorn. And the problem we tried to solve is we tried to count visits of the unicorn was visiting properties for inspection, and we wanted to count completed visits per property for the last 12 months. And then I first mentioned this problem to my colleague. She said, "Oh, that should be easy." Not quite. I think the Leon created this animation in here. So for the for this year, you have a fixed start and the end. We all know that year actually starts in January and it finishes in December. For the last 12 months, it's something quite dynamically moving through the timeline. And Leon had some good analogy, which he can help me how to explain this.
Yeah, because it's a rolling 12 months. So we have a similar problem historically with birthdays, with contacts. This idea that a month before someone's birthday, then I need a notification, and so you have this rolling 1 month before a birthday type thing. In accounting, probably the best example is the debtors bucket, so 30-day bucket, 60-day bucket. So yeah, how many debts are 30 days old? How many debts are 60 days old? That kind of thing. And it's a rolling scale. You don't look at your debtors at the end of the year and go, okay, how many people are 12 months out? It's something that you have to look at every week or every month. But it's this idea of a moving area that you want to count on. So you want to, and you'll explain how you do this. You want to drop out the old ones and you want to include the new ones.
Yeah, pretty much. And we also, so we basically, then we calculate, we not just increment like we do through the year. Every month we just add a new properties to our account. We also have to decrement. We have to take something which is behind of this sliding timeline. And the tricky bit is we can put some kind of trigger or something. We can say, then we completed something. Let's just recalculate. But for something which is expiring and which unicorn leaves behind, we don't even have anything telling us when it happened, because it's happening over time. So the basically what we have to do, we have to use a scheduled job, which will be just looking at the time changing. Oh, okay. It's also sliding. However, my client is lucky to have that many clients. And with those clients, which around 9,000, I guess, they have 300,000 plus properties, and all related visits for these properties have to be recalculated daily. And we see this unicorn died because and this so did I. Then I realized that I have no idea how to solve this problem in a proper way. Do we really write the scheduled job running every day on 300,000 plus properties, going through all the work orders, which are visits? And this is madness, because it takes hours and hours. It actually takes days to perform this kind of job, right? So so we came up with this tricky no-code solution, and there are 3 parts. This actually, instead of telling you 3 times about 3 different problems, I will tell you about one problem which we solved with 3 types of no-code, and they all did the kind of different bits to this. And this first part of the solution, we still have to update all the properties to set the initial count. So we have to do it once. We run this job once, and then we put this on complete trigger, which will be calculating us the changing count every time the job is completed. Then we have to create a scheduled daily job, but not for all properties, but just for those properties which are behind, like Leon said. These are left behind that one day, which already passed. Yes, like today we're calculating something, then tomorrow we have to exclude those jobs which they're 12 months minus day ago. So for the initial, let me just explain quickly for all 3 jobs, then I will show you how it looks like in the solution and on production. Do I have enough time, Leon?
Yeah, we're only at 37 minutes. We've got plenty of time.
Okay, so for initializing count. That's interesting because we had, again, you even with no code, you have multiple options, and this arguable solution in here. But I love XRM Toolbox. I think it's so useful. It's amazing, and bulk workflow running automation as a part of this XRM Toolbox is really amazing because it allows you to use advanced find query and run query, basically a query all the records which you want to run your workflows on. And yeah, this job is a long running job, and what else? It could be done with the flow, but then we say maintenance. Then we say maintenance and maintainability. We probably talk people. You may not realize, but we talk about people maintaining your system. And our system is also we maintain by some people who used to use certain technologies. So we decided for this one run to use this bulk workflow bulk workflow run, which our admin is favors this tool. This is very simple. It can be done with code. It's like a typical plugin on complete on update of something. We decided to build Flow here, and Flow was very simple, and we just picked up Flow because it was the simplest solution. And the tricky schedule job. There's no concept of schedule job, natural concept of schedule job in Dynamics, and we used to use some tricky workarounds. Leon, do you remember?
Yeah, it was the bulk delete.
Yeah.
So the bulk delete function in Dynamics could be scheduled. You could schedule to bulk delete every 24 hours, and so what you would do is you would create a custom entity, and then you'd have it bulk delete a record in that custom entity, and then use that as a trigger to run your workflow. I think Matt Widerman originally came up with it.
Yeah, it was widely used by the community, and we use it in almost every project because then we've got North 52, which is add-on, and it was solved by some sort of coding, or I don't know how they did it. But now we've got flows, which is yay. We can just easily, the scheduling is basically there's a type of flow you can run. You can say, I want to run the scheduled job, and you just create it, and it's there, no tricks. So we used this the schedule job, and then we had a conversation after our meetup, Leon, with some developers. They pointed to me that it could be solved. Why won't you try to solve it with Azure Function, or why would you try to solve it with Logic Apps? I mean, the Logic Apps is still a no-code solution. So and with Azure Function, first of all, for maintainability reason, it's a separate integration bit somewhere which has to be managed separately. It's not a part of your old solution in Dynamics 365. It's somewhere. It has to have a separate source control. It has to be maintained in a separate way. And so we picked up Flow.
There was a mention of a timeout issue there as well. What's the timeout issue?
Okay, so the interesting bit, the Azure functions which people are mentioning all the time, they have some limitations, right? So for Flow is a great thing because Flow, unless the Flow runs, I think the timeout is 30 days currently. So
Okay.
it can wait for 30 days, or it can do something for 30 days. There is no concept of timeout. They on a separate connectors for your action can be timeout. But if you query in a small portions, or you do something like you just query, then you run something like for each branch. It doesn't matter, right? So there is no concept of timeout as it is. But for Azure Function, for the standard one, there was a timeout around 15 minutes, I guess, and I was very nervous about this. You can use a paid unlimited Azure Function, which runs in a separate environment. It's a serverless, and it spins pretty much the separate VM for you, and it does stuff, but it costs a lot. It really costs. It could be a cost effective if you're doing something, you know. And then in this case, you mentioned licenses, Leon, but there is a concept of flow as a part of Dynamics license, which in our case, we do everything within a Dynamics, and all the actions we perform, they in relation to, you say Dataflex Pro?
Dataflex
Right?
Pro, that's CDS, right?
Yeah, I did it. Yes, I did it.
Dataflex Pro.
Every time you mention CDS Unicorn dies. Dataflex Pro. So yeah, he used so in the context of Dataflex Pro, and so it's a part of your Dynamics licenses, which were also raised on our event, and people were concerned about licenses. There's a very quick demo, and mostly I don't want to even go much through the run once workflow, and hopefully my everything is not expired, and I tried to make it a little bit like bigger, so you can see that pretty much it's a fake no code. It's a fake old no code pretty much, which consists is mostly with the custom workflow activities, and it's only one no code action at the end. This is what we ended up before the new no code, before Flow was introduced. We started using custom workflow activities a lot, and this is one example, but it was very simple to construct, and that's why again, my excuse for this rubbish, honestly, is run once thing. So it had to be run once somehow. And it was a big and tricky and scary thing. So we used the technologies which we were 100% sure will work. So the front ones, that's a simple one, the simple plugin. This is a scheduled, which I promised you, and I see, it's very simple like this. You can just schedule it, and you can specify how often do you run, and even when do you run, which time zone. It's simple. You just have a trigger every day, run it, right? And we do all this black magic. We retrieve work orders, which are basically our visits, and we just do all the bunch of stuff. And what I wanted to show you here, and I open it for you, this is a production environment. See, in most of the times, it's in within 15 minutes, but we have 16 and 19 sometimes, right? So if you go with the simple Azure function, we probably would be very nervous at some point, right? If it's going to be over limit or if it still works. And I also wanted to show you my really proud of. There are no fail runs in here. So it's been running smoothly for months on production, on the real data for real customers. And this is another question which we were discussing at the last meetup, at that meetup, which is a real one. The people were asking questions. Yeah, this is a flow. It looks like very cool for proof of concept. Is it production ready? We are not quite sure we can start using it because we don't know about licenses, and we don't know if it's robust. My favorite thing is robust enough to use on production. Yes, I think it's a good proof of what, yeah, it is production ready. And more we use Flow, more my colleague says, yeah, Leon, tell me what you're looking at, and I will make it.
No, I'm just seeing how long you've been running this Flow for, right? Because you've got no runs. Oh, well, if it's been running a week, well, good. It's been running for months.
It's been running for many months. I'm not sure.
Every day.
it was
every once a month.
Yeah.
No issues.
So we are in July, no issues. And yeah, there's something I'm really proud of, because it was tricky to design, it was tricky to implement, and this is my conclusion to this. And let me just run from this slide, and hopefully it will run. Yay, magic again. It's not just for proof of concept. You've seen this, and more I talk to my colleagues, which are developers, and they are concerned about new technologies. And as Leon mentioned, the old workflows, everyone used to it, and it's very people comfortable with that particular technology, not comfortable with flows which are still power automate, which changing every time. But even those people are coming to me and saying, oh, we built it once and it works perfectly. Why wouldn't we just go and build again with the flow? Why would we code? And now we're even building a very complex integrations and multiple integrations. And at some point I'll record a video about this, and hopefully there will be a successful project as well. We're building multiple integrations based on Dataflex Pro and flows only, no other technologies. We have all the range of we can build custom connectors, we can use standard connectors, we can do many things. And as what I wanted to demonstrate you is you can solve pretty tricky problems with no code, and it just works.
Yeah, I guess a good advert for that would be our other presentation that I did with Amy Kaepernick, where we showed how you could use the Azure Cognitive Services to take an image and recognize what was in the image. In the case of Amy, it was a quokka. In the case of me, it was a redback spider. So if you look at the YouTube channel, you'll see that presentation. And that shows you just how equivalent and how robust, if you like, no code versus code is. It's certainly a viable solution, and you're not locked in to pure configuration. You don't have to rebuild. The old ideas of technical debt, if you configure and then you reach a point where you need to code, and then you have to undo everything and redo it again in development. Those kinds of days are going away. You can very much get to the back end of the configuration these days. This is our contact information. So, yep, my name's Leon Tribe. That's my blog. That's my LinkedIn. I do have a GitHub repository. I don't do huge amounts in there. There's a little bit of bits and pieces in there, but yeah, nothing serious because I'm not a coder. And there's my Twitter.
We actually probably have to create our own GitHub repository for this YouTube channel, where we could put our presentations, maybe some materials which we think will be useful for our audience. And Leon, thank you very much. And this is a great Corker video, which I really I'm really pleased we have it, and we put it in our channel. And now we've got another video, which is thank you very much for watching, and Leon, thank you very much for participating in this re-recording event. And thanks a lot for supporting this meetup, which basically is to show developers the pros and cons of using different technology approaches to solve problems.
Thank you very much. And thank you for watching.